tournament, everybody. I'm going to answer some questions about the book. Thanks to everybody who gave us questions, and I apologize to the vast majority of you whose questions we're not going to answer. It wasn't because they weren't good, it's just because there were too many good ones, which is a great problem to have. Not a problem in every city. I'm trying to throw shade, but we've actually had a great tour. This question comes from Max, who asks, is the name an allusion to the myth that turtles hold up the earth, resulting in infinite turtles? And if the name is an illusion, why is it named that way? It is. It's named after that. I'll tell the story for those who don't know it. I think it's a great story. It's been around for over 100 years. So a scientist gives an hour-long lecture about how the Earth started out as a bunch of stardust and it kind of clumped together into this large sphere, and for a while it was extremely hot, and then it cooled down enough that we got some liquid oceans, and eventually life, single-celled, extremely simple life emerged in those oceans. And then over the course of over 1 billion years, life got more complex and more complex and more complex, until eventually it crawled out onto land, and there was life on land, and life continued to grow more complex until about 200,000 years or so ago, humans emerged. And at the end of this long lecture, a woman in the back of the auditorium raised her hand and gets called on. This is, by the way, why we don't do hand call-ons, because I don't like to get unexpected questions. And the woman in the back raised her hand and says, that's all fine and good, sir, but the truth is that the world is a flat plane resting on the back of a giant turtle. And the lecturer decides to have some fun with this question and says, well, then what is that turtle standing on? And she says, well, the turtle's standing on yet a larger turtle. And then he says, well, what is that turtle standing on? And the woman says, you don't understand, sir, it's turtles all the way down. I find this story incredibly helpful. When I was young, I thought it was a story about how stupid superstition is, I don't think that's what the story is about. I think the story is about how both the scientist and the person asking the question are correct. The world is a billions-of-year-old sphere formed of stardust. The world is also the stories we tell about it. The stories we tell about it are true, and they matter, and not in some rhetorical or squiggly way, but in an actual way. The stories we tell about each other and ourselves, who we include in the human story, who we exclude, that shapes the world that we live in and the people who live in it. And so that's the first way I find the story helpful. The second way I find the story helpful is that a lot of times in my life, when I've been consumed with obsessive worry, I find myself in a situation where I'm looking for the bottom turtle. Like, let's say that you're trying to believe that you are really real, that you're like an actual person and not, like an extremely complicated, like living inside of an extremely complicated and compelling simulation. There are lots of ways to try to reassure yourself that you are really real, and that you are an actual person, and that yourself is real. Unfortunately, all of these ways are inadequate, I think, anyway. And in the end, all you can say is that it's turtles all the way down. So many times in my life, I'm looking for the bottom turtle in a turtles all the way down situation. So many times I'm looking for reassurance from some kind of discrete, identifiable, single noun when I am actually in a situation that requires me to confront and deal with an infinite set. So yeah, that's the other reason I find it helpful. Why did I call the book that? Well, for that you have to read the book. Okay, this next question comes from Bon Bon, who asks, what advice would you give to young authors? So I guess I have 3 pieces of advice. The first is to read a lot. I think reading is the greatest apprenticeship that writers have. I think it's how we figure out how people over the centuries have used scratches on a page to create ideas that can live inside of someone else's head. And the cool thing about reading is that you can learn from people who lived hundreds of years ago. Like, you can have as your teachers people who are long dead. I find that really great, like that you can learn from actual geniuses and see how they did it, and then you can steal from them, which I think is most of what writing is. The second piece of advice I have is to keep writing, to not stop writing, to not give up on your writing, to allow yourself to suck, especially. That piece of advice comes from my friend Maureen Johnson, but I think it's so deeply true, and I think one of the reasons it took me 6 years to write this book is because I wasn't giving myself enough permission to suck. I think you can't expect to, like, pick up a violin and play Carnegie Hall the next day, and you can't expect to start out writing amazing novels. I expect that the rest of my life will be spent trying to get better at writing books, and hoping that I can continue to get better, hoping that I am continuing to get better. And I like that. I like the idea that mastery isn't something you achieve, but it's something that you seek after and never find. There's something very beautiful about that to me, and also fulfilling. My last piece of advice is not really a piece of advice. I thought when I was a younger person that writing was like being an astronaut or being a professional athlete, like it wasn't a career that regular people had. And that is not true. In fact, it is a career that regular people have, lots of regular people. I'm one of them, but there are lots and lots of writers out there. There are lots of ways to make a living writing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to make a living entirely from writing books. You may have a day job. I have a day job making crash course videos. I like it very much. I'm lucky to have it. I wouldn't want to give it up. So, you know, I'm not saying that like everybody gets to, you know, have a book that's read by millions of people. But I worked at Booklist for many years, this magazine that reviews books. And Booklist reviews 400 or 500 books every 2 weeks. All of those books are written by someone, and there's no reason why you can't be one of them. Next question comes from Allison, who says, first of all, I'd like to thank you for writing this. It made me feel like I wasn't alone and I was understood. Thank you, Allison. That's very kind of you. Second of all, I was wondering, do you create a reality for your characters after the book ends? Well, Allison, you're so nice, and now I'm just going to disappoint you. I don't. I don't. I feel bad because I know you want me to. I know you want me to say, like, what happens to Hazel after the end of the book, or what happens to Miles after the end of Looking for Alaska. I don't know. That seems like it's your problem. I mean, to be honest, like, when I finish a book, I'm like, oh, thank God, like, these people are no longer my problem. I give them to you, and I hope that you receive them well, and that you imagine wonderful futures for them in fan fiction. Sometimes I think about, I try to leave a book in a place where I feel like I can leave them, and I can be okay with it, and I can kind of say goodbye to them. And in Turtles All the Way Down, no spoilers, but that meant something very different to me than it has meant in any of my previous books. And so I did think very differently about where I was going to leave that story and the people in it, because I felt, I guess, differently about them than I did about any of the characters in my previous books. The last question that I want to answer, and there's a bunch of versions of this question, and I'm just going to answer, like, try to answer all of them at once, and I apologize that I'm only reading Kristen's. In Turtles All the Way Down, Asa struggles with the notion that her medication determines the real her, and that somehow by taking it, she becomes less herself and more of the cookie-cutter normal. Do you agree with this to some extent? No. I don't. I understand the feeling there, you know, like I get the feeling, and it's a feeling I've had, and I thought it was a feeling that was realistic for Asa to have. But my experience is that, like, I don't, taking my medicine doesn't make me less of a person or less of myself. It makes it possible for me to live my life the way that I want to live it, and have the relationships I want to have, and do the work I want to do. So, mental illness is obviously really stigmatized in our culture, and that's a huge problem, one that many of you asked about. And I don't really know how we go about getting rid of that stigma, except by having people acknowledge that they are mentally ill and that they still have fulfilling lives lives, and that's one of the reasons I feel strongly about talking about this, even though at times it's very uncomfortable to talk about. But I also think that mental illness at times is romanticized. Like if you Google all artists are, Google autofills mad. And it's true that people who work in creative fields have higher than average rates of mental illness. It's also true that lawyers have higher than average rates of mental illness. And you never see anybody be like, oh my God, if you want to be a good property lawyer, you better like ride the line between sickness and health. You better get as close as you can to being really unwell if you want to be able to negotiate that contract effectively. And I feel the same way about writing, to be honest. I feel like I bought into this dangerous romantic lie that if I stopped taking my medication, I would become a better writer. And for me, at least, the consequences of that were truly catastrophic. And I think it's and that's why I think it's a really dangerous lie, because I've experienced it, and it was awful and a huge, huge mistake for me. I write best and I work best and I am able to live my life the way that I want to live it when I'm treating my chronic health problem the way that you would treat any chronic health problem, with consistency and care. And so I just would encourage anybody out there who's concerned about their mental health to reach out to someone, reach out to an adult you trust, reach out to your doctor or to a therapist, and talk about it and pursue help. It can be really difficult and really frustrating and a long process, but mental illness is treatable. People do get better, and lots of people who are chronically mentally ill like myself have very fulfilling lives. I'm evidence of that, but there are lots and lots of people who are evidence of that. So I just wanted to share those words of encouragement, I hope, and thank you. I'm just going to move these chairs, hold on. From the stagehand as well, and wear many hats. I want to bring back to the stage, mostly so that he can help me with the chairs. Ladies and gentlemen, my brother Hank Green.
To Dear Hank and John. It's a comedy podcast where me and my brother John will answer your questions, give you dubious advice, and bring you all the excuse from both Mars and AFC Wimbledon. Hey, John, how you doing?
I'm all right, but it's actually, there's something more important than how I'm doing.
Oh, well, what a shock. All world.
Hank, 5 years ago, we did a show in Cincinnati.
I remember.
Remember? Mm-hmm. I don't. But I looked on my calendar, and it did happen. At that show, there were two people, Kenny and Amy. Are you guys here tonight? We're here. Hey! Hey! Hey, Kenny. How's it going? So 5 years ago, Kenny and Amy met at a John and Hank show. Look at the person you're sitting next to. It could be. Probably not. Almost definitely not. But maybe. Anyway, I heard that Kenny had a question.
You want to come up?
Is it coming up?
Yeah, just come up.
Everybody be calm.
Just have a lot of time to think about that. Yes or no?
I feel, oh man. Hi, guys.
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry to storm the stage like this.
That's okay.
Just real quick, 5 years ago I tweeted you asking whether I should go to my business law class or if I should go to the show or your book signing. And you said, don't come. Yeah. So I knew you wouldn't try to find me on Xbox Live to play Halo. You said we would hang out later, and I knew that was a lie. So I decided to come, and just because you're such a great writer, and I'm so thankful for that because I met the love of my life. So, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to have your blessing. Your nerd. Thanks. If I could have that before I do what I'm about to do.
Yeah, 100%. We're in. Don't make Amy wait anymore, man.
Amy, you're my best friend. I love you so much. And I want you to be the best friend for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?
We do that at every show. Kenny's been on the road with us for a month. Every night, though, they just make it seem so real. Congratulations, guys.
It's just a bus full of John, Hank, the big turtle man, and those two.
I mean, that was one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of, Kenny and Amy. Thank you. Congratulations.
I forgot my phrase of the week, John.
Great. Okay, we do this bit called the phrase of the week where Hank has to say a phrase and I have to say a phrase. We don't know each other.
I remember what it was.
We have to guess it at the end of the show. I am 0 for 7. And Hank is 7 for 7.
No, I got it like 3 times.
All right, I don't know. And all I know is that he's much better at this game than I am. And it's not fair because I am anxious and I can't pay attention to what he's saying.
Hey, John, you got any questions from our listeners? I got one.
Great, you start.
This question comes from Emily, who asks, Dear Hank and John, do you think we sneeze in our sleep? I never thought about that, Emily. Well, I don't, no. I know. I mean, I sleep next to someone every night, and I have for like 15 years, and she's never sneezed me awake. So, I feel like, no, she's woken me up in many other ways.
I feel like yes, but we're way outside our area of expertise.
But like,
our expertise is getting people engaged. We're going to answer questions about sleep sneezing. I don't think you can sneeze in your sleep, but I'm not sure.
What does your body do? How does it know not to sneeze? It's like, okay, you're asleep. Don't do 2 things. No peeing, no sneezing. And then sometimes you pee, but never do you sneeze. Yeah, is that a problem with some preschoolers? They just sneeze, and that's not right.
Hank, I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
It's a great question. It comes from Ben, and it's really, it's a deep one. Ben asks, Dear John and Hank, when will you jump the shark?
I love so much that
Ben.
you've phrased this as a thing that is going to happen in the future.
Thank you, Ben.
Not a thing that has already happened.
Really appreciate that, Ben, that you situated that one in the future, implying that we have not yet jumped the shark. For the 85% of you who don't know what jump the shark means, because that phrase jumped the shark 10 years ago. Jump the Shark is a reference to Happy Days. There's a moment in
Which was a television show.
Right. Well, we're going to spend the rest of this show trying to explain Jump the Shark. there was a television program called Happy Days, like 4 seasons in. This character, Fonzie, was water skiing, and he literally jumped over an actual, well, not a fake shark. And that is widely considered to be the moment that Happy Days became a terrible television show. That it jumped the shark. And then other things can also jump the shark, like Vlog Brothers 3 years ago.
Not true.
Oh man, we keep coming back.
Hank recently pointed out to me that if we were a sitcom, we'd be in our 11th season. It does, but like nobody, yeah, but like nobody, yeah.
Yeah, but you also pointed out that you uploaded a video, and this hasn't happened in a very long time. It got 1,000 likes before it got its first dislike, which is not something that you would pay attention to as people who watch videos, but it's something that we pay attention to. It feels very good. So that's nice. I don't care how many views it gets, as long as people like what we do. A little bit, at least.
Hank, do you have another question?
Yeah, here's one. It comes from Jack, who asks, "Dear Hank and John, there's a lot of subtext to this question, but it's not written on the page. How do you stay optimistic?"
I am optimistic about some things. I'm optimistic about like Kenny and Amy. I'm optimistic like young people fall in love, babies are being born. You know, like great things happen every day. Every single day is the best day in many, many people's lives. Also the worst day in many people's lives. Also the last day in many people's lives. Yeah, and I find cause for optimism in that. I also find, I have to say, a little bit of cause for optimism in the fact that, like, if you look at overall trends in the human condition, the last 25 years have probably been the best 25 years in human history. Like, absolute poverty has dropped faster over the last 25 years than it has at any period of human history by a lot. The number of people who suffer from malnourishment has dropped dramatically. The number of kids who die has dropped dramatically. In fact, the number of kids, even though the population of the Earth is now 7 billion humans, the number of kids who will die this year is fewer in absolute numbers than it has been in any year for 2,000 years, back when the population of humans was like 50 million. So like, things are getting better on the trend line, but then if you look at certain other trend lines, there are very worrying developments for sure. And I don't want to minimize that because that is real.
Yeah, I mean, no trend lines go like this, you know? They go like this.
Yeah, but like sometimes they go like this. You don't know, the problem is you never know where you are in the drop, right?
Yeah, right. Well, yes. So here's my thing. So you can look at like the big picture, and there's like some good signs there, and then you look at the middle, like right now, sort of what's happening on the news, and it's always, it tends to always look pretty bad. But maybe worse now than other times. And then, but then if you look at like the really small picture, like if I stay optimistic by looking at my friends and looking at the people I love and like their passion and what they do. Like just yesterday in Nashville, I got to hang out with Catherine's roommate from college, and she's working. You know, she's a pastor and she's doing all this very cool stuff, and she's working on hunger and like from the state level to the national level, and making sure people are more food secure and. Like just seeing that, and like having people like that in my life, who I can see like practically dedicating, you know, not their whole lives, but parts of their lives to making the world better for other people, caring, and also just watching people raise their families. Like that's where I get hope is from the individuals, and I think it's a lot easier when you look at the people you interact with, who are hopefully, you know, 90% plus cool. And if not, you know, hopefully there are other options.
This question comes from Bob, who asks, as a college history professor, I would like to know what one thing you think kids should know about American history. Bob, I feel like that's a better question for you. I'm just a guy who reads from a teleprompter, Bob. I'm the Ron Burgundy of Crash Course U.S. History. It's only a slight exaggeration. I guess when I look at U.S. history, I see the story of a country that had really compelling ideals that it failed to live up to, but that people sort of forced it to live up to for more people over time, I guess, is what I see. So I think it's a story for me of trying to become slowly and less unjust and closer to the ideals of equal protection under the law and closer to the idea that you know, all people are born with certain inalienable rights that have to be protected, and those ideals that are very compelling, but that for a long time and even today we don't live up to. And that I find also to be a kind of hopeful story, but a hopeful story, as Hank said, with lots of ups and downs along the way, because I do think that, you know, certainly the U.S. is a lot more legally inclusive than it was 200 years ago, or 100 years ago, or even 60 years ago, and there's some hope in that for me. But that's also easy for me to say, coming from an extraordinarily privileged position in every possible way.
John.
Yes.
What is your biggest advice for young people? I know, we're just got doozies today.
What is your biggest advice for young people?
Go out there and make noise. Have a good hamster day. Just go, what kind of hamster mischief can you get up to, little hamsters?
I feel like that's such an obvious phrase of the week. It must be a red herring situation. Like it must be little hamsters. I mean, that's so obvious. It can't be. God, I'm so bad at the phrase of the week thing. If I were a young person today, I don't know how you guys do it. It seems pretty intense out there. It seems pretty overwhelming. You can't get away from social situations even when you go home because they can get inside your phone. I mean, I don't know. I wish you well.
Yeah. I do not know how to do it. It seems very, like it was very intense when I was a young person. It was, the social pressure is very intense. And I can't imagine it being sort of more public and sort of like the number of people you have to maybe think about when, and also the amount of stuff you have to make, both in terms of academics, but also in terms of maintaining your social image, which I think a lot of people think a lot, but about a lot. But the thing that helped me the most was saying and thinking to myself, like, how can I question this story? Like the story that I'm being told about the way that I should live my life. Not saying like, it must be wrong because everything is just fiction and it's all a story, so ignore it. But like looking at the story and at least saying, okay, I'm gonna understand it and try and parse out which are the bits that actually resonate with me, that I actually care about. And that's hard because the story is like the thing that we swim in. It's so hard to get out of that water and to see it for what it is. But to try and tease it out and look at what we're being told and how we're supposed to act, and but more think about like what is the core of how I want to be a person, of how I want to care about my fellow people, and also like how I want people to see me, because that is important, and like that drives a lot of what I do even today. But to really look at it and try and figure out which bits are important to me actually, rather than which bits I'm just doing because it's the thing to do.
One other thing I would say, when I was in high school and middle school, which I understand here is the same place, which sounds great. I don't know, I mean, middle school was horrible, so maybe it's that. I have no idea. It was so bad, it can't have gotten worse. The only other thing I'd say is, like, it's impossible to have a long view, like, it's impossible to have a perspective, because when you're inside a really difficult year in your life, you don't know that it will later just be one of the years of your life. Like, you can't, like, what is that thing where, like, the tree ring, like, what is that? every year there's a different ring on the tree, you know? And like, you come through the tree and you can see all the history of it. You can see the whole, like the years that there were fires. You can see the years that there were difficulties, and then you can see the years that things were good and abundant. But you can't know that until you're like the big tree, if that makes sense. That's not too much of a torture.
I love that. That's great. Hey, you should write a whole book about that. And that's what's coming next.
That's what they call it, the big tree. All right, and this question comes from Casey, who writes, "Dear John and Nick, you can tell a lot about a person by whether they prefer chocolate or vanilla ice cream. I'm not sure I agree with your premise. I think you can tell one thing about a person. What is your favorite? What?
What are you going to think about us? What's the right answer?
I mean, the truth is that I don't really like either of those ice creams. Like, if I'm given an ice, like, if I'm in a situation, I mean, I'll accept them both. If I'm in a Baskin-Robbins 31 flavor situation, neither of them is in my top 10, for sure. You got bubble gum, rainbow sherbet. Sherbet? I'm kidding. I guess, like I usually am more likely to have vanilla ice cream, I guess. What about you?
There's a weird thing where the word vanilla now means sort of bland and boring and normal, which is a really interesting thing to me because, like, and I kind of like I was like, yeah, vanilla. And then I had some vanilla ice cream one day and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, you realize why, like, vanilla beans used to run the world economy.
Yeah.
You know, like, instead of money, we had vanilla.
People died for that bean.
Yeah. Maybe that's the phrase? Dying for the bean? Maybe? Probably not. I don't know. So bad at this game. I forgot what the previous one I thought it was. Why don't y'all just guess at the end of this? Hank, let's answer one more questions from our listeners, or two more questions, one each, before we get to the all-important news from Mars and AFC Wimbledon. This question comes from Megan, who writes, "Dear John and Hank, this is the first time I've been able to come to an event with you, and I'm so excited. Well, Megan, I hope that you meet your future spouse tonight." No pressure. No pressure. It's okay if you don't. John, you've expressed many times your hatred of cutting the grass. Just to be clear, I don't just hate cutting the grass, although I do hate cutting the grass. I also hate grass. It's insane. It's the weirdest of all the weird things that we do in 21st century America, mint nickels, etc. The weirdest thing that we do by far is give large swaths of our earth over to this one non-native plant species called turf grass. The more you think about it, the weirder it gets. Like, why? We could be growing blueberries, or corn, or just any plant. We could have clover that didn't have to be mowed once a week. It's bananas. What was your question? In the summer when I am home, I listen to your podcast, Dear Hank and John, to pass the time and make the experience of cutting the grass bearable. It takes 2 hours. Also, we spend an astonishing amount of time maintaining this invasive plant species. You could almost look at human history as a story in which turf grass decided that it wanted to take over the planet and found ways to make human beings cultivate it. Like it brainwashed us. All right, so I'm got to your question.
Examine your stories, everyone.
How do I remedy this situation? Not cutting the grass is not an option, as I am 19 and I must, my dad makes me. Have you talked to your dad about just planting like an apple orchard or anything? We're in Ohio. Make some corn. No, I mean, Megan, what you got to do is you got to mow the grass. You got to spend 2 hours doing it every second Sunday or whatever, and listen to Dear Hank and John, which I really appreciate. And if I can give you one more piece of advice, I want you to spend those 2 hours every other week, or possibly every week if your dad's super hardcore. I want you to spend those 2 hours thinking about how you will never do this when you have a yard. That said, we have a bunch of grass. I mean, it's so hard to get rid of. The neighbors judge you.
All right, this last question comes from Lauren, who asks, Dear Hank and John, who has been your biggest musical influence?
Oh, that's a great question.
In all of the music.
Mountain goats.
For me, I don't know that there's a less musical person on earth. The Mountain Goats are overwhelmingly my favorite. They're a great band and very helpful to me in my writing and just in my life. How about you?
Oh, it's gotta be the Happy Giants.
Yeah.
I just can't stop. And they keep, I mean, they're so amazing. These guys, they keep going on tour, they keep releasing new albums, and every time a new album comes out, I buy it, and then I put it in my car stereo, and it stays in there for a year. That's all I listen to for a year.
Till the new one comes out.
Till the next one comes out. And I'm like, next day will be Giants album.
They're great.
It's so good.
They're great. All right, Hank, what is the news from Mars?
The news from Mars. John, this